Welcome to Theology Thursday, an ecumenical space for students to discuss matters of faith and theology.
I'm your host, Connor Grubbs.
I am your co-host, Ryan Mock.
And I'm your co-host, Johnny Grubbs. It doesn't work anymore because there's video. They can see he's not here.
All right, although if for those on the podcast, totally would have been convinced.
I know, because it sounded just like him, right?
Yes. I honestly thought that he might have just appeared behind me, and I didn't know about it. He snuck in so quietly. He actually went in from the ceiling.
Through the ceiling tile.
He entered into the ceiling tile and then went through the viaduct up here, and then he ninja'd down.
All right, I'm going to find it's okay. Here's the thing. We've been experiencing... Johnny would be here with us. He was here with us Monday night when we recorded.
He's no longer with us.
And he's gone. We are experiencing some technical difficulties.
Connor's experiencing technical difficulties.
Do you want to take ownership of this podcast or not?
No, I'm good. You could keep...
All right, well, then you're not the co-host anymore. You can go out that door. We, at Theology Thursday, is experiencing some technical difficulties. And here's the thing. It's really sad because we had the episode. We recorded it Monday night. Johnny was here with us. We answered the questions. It was beautiful, and the quality was pristine. But the files were so large that my little MacBook Air that doesn't have a whole lot of data on it, that really is just for schooling, almost exploded. And
he was sitting in his apartment, and it was shaking before him.
This message will self-destruct. And so...
He quickly had to delete it.
I didn't mean to... We lost the file, okay? Long story short, we lost the file. And so, last minute, I was like, hey, guys, we want to record, whatever. Johnny couldn't do it. So we're going to do it again. We're going to answer the same questions. It's going to be okay. For those of you watching on YouTube, the audio quality is not there yet. It's not quite there yet. But the other option was give you good quality audio that's out of sync with our lips. It gets really annoying. There's a couple videos up on the channel that are already like that. So, we started doing video however many episodes back, and it's been a technical challenge. And that's one of the reasons we waited so long to do it, is because we wanted it to be done right, and it's still not being done right. So we apologize. Most of you listen on audio anyway, so you don't care. Let us begin. We're here now. This is the podcast that the people are going to hear. So let's do it with all of our hearts.
That's right. Yep.
The time has come.
The time.
So... my subpoint has to do with a recent finding from Barna Research Group, which says that Christians are 11% of Christians.
The Christians are 11% of Christians.
No, let me say this right, okay? I don't have it in front of me. I'm trying. 11% of Christians...
Mm-hmm.
are less likely to say that they believe that there is racial oppression in America than they were 5 years ago. Okay, so essentially these Christians, if you had asked them 5 years ago, would have agreed that there's racial oppression, and then you ask them today, and they'd say no.
Wow.
Really weird, right?
Yeah,
that's a pretty steady uptick for 5 years. And also, don't you think these things are more at the forefront today than they were 5 years ago?
Yeah, that's kind of the way I saw it, that things have kind of amped up a little bit in the past 5 years.
Sure. Well, and John Matthews, who was on our podcast to talk about this, he said in that podcast episode that that he didn't feel things were getting worse. It's just that there's more exposure, right?
Yeah, I get that.
I do think things have kind of come to a head because of that exposure, and now people that were trying to avoid being in the conversation are having to be part of the conversation. It's everybody's got to make a decision about this, but here's my theory. I could be wrong. I could be right. As we've seen, politics get really polarizing. We don't usually talk about politics because this is one of those things.
Because it's polarizing.
Because it's polarizing, and that's why nothing I'm about to say is for one side or the other. It's just what it is. But I do think that it's because people have made race a political issue rather than a people issue. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, racism is a hard issue.
Yes.
And I think people will go with whatever political ideology they think it fits. They're thinking of there's organizations and political parties that they're attaching to certain things, and to be loyal to their political party, they have to take a certain view, regardless of how true it is. And it's just unfortunate that it's come to that, because we've seen with coronavirus, and now we're seeing here with racism, it's becoming a political issue, when in reality, sure, I mean, we talk about systemic racism, that's certainly a part of it. Sure, the government does play a part in, health and health crises, but at the end of the day, a health issue is a health issue, and a heart issue is a heart issue. If there's racism in the heart, we've talked about this too. It's sin. That's a sin issue at the end of the day. And so here's the thing. In the middle of everything going on right now, I think is really important for us to remember. Not everything has to be political, and we are experiencing the politicization of everything. Literally everything.
Yes.
And that's, in short, that's what I'm trying to say with my sub point. I don't think I need to go any further than that. But that's what's happening. Don't fall into it. All right?
Well said.
Okay. You had something. It's something we've talked about before. I hate to talk about it again. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, I saw an article today. Actually, I saw it yesterday, but I didn't actually read it until today. It was actually released yesterday. From Christianity Today, this article provides more information about Robie Zacarias, who passed away in a few months. Was it a few months ago or over a year ago now?
No, it was within 2020. I think it was fairly recent.
It was spring of 2020. Robie Zacarias passed away, and then a bunch of stuff came out about him and sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And so there was stuff that came out shortly after his death about a scandal with a lady in Canada and him sexting her and trying to get things from her, and then him outright denying it when she came forward to talk about it. He denied it. So that was one thing, and then recently it has been revealed that there have been reports from 3 different ladies at a spa that Robie Zacarias frequents. About 2 or 3 times a week, he would go to this spa that he was actually the co-owner of. That was actually an interesting thing I didn't know about Robie Zacarias, is that he owned several spas. And so he went 2 to 3 times a week. It was very close to about 15 minutes away from, I guess, their headquarters or wherever he was. He's in Georgia, I think, Alpharetta.
Atlanta.
Yeah. And so he went to the spa and basically sexually harassed at least 3 of the workers there. Involved
lewd conduct.
Lewd conduct. We'll just leave it at that. So the article is on Christianity Today if you care to read it. It is very sad.
Well, and also just to add to that, his ministry has denied the claims and has hired an investigator to research these claims.
Right. All around, this all stinks.
Yeah.
It's not good. We've talked about this before. Don't put Christian leaders on a pedestal. in the Christianity Today article, you'll read about some statements that he had made to these women, including the woman that he had the scandal with that was released a few months back, about how he himself felt burdened by his ministry, and this was a way for him to release his stress. Don't put these guys on a pedestal because they're humans and they fall. This is a pretty hard fall here.
Right, and for a nuanced approach, since Johnny isn't here, I gotta throw that in there. When stuff like this comes up, there's a few things. I mean, one, you've got to take allegations like this seriously, every time. And so say that right out the gate. And then the two other things is there's two sides of the coin here, and it's why things like this do need to be investigated, and there does need to be proper research to make sure. One, upstanding pastors and ministers get accused of terrible things by people with horrible intentions who just want to ruin their lives and ministries all the time.
Yes.
I personally have experienced lots of rumors and things that have come up even in just my short time in ministry, and these things happen. So I don't always just assume that allegations like this are true, but I do take them seriously. All right, you can't just dismiss them either. And then on the other hand of it is what Ryan was just saying. We can't put these people on a pedestal. Remember that every pastor you've ever listened to, every author you've ever read, no matter how much you respect them and no matter how much value the things that they've preached or written have in and of themselves, these people are capable of all those things and more, because they're fallen humans. And so, yeah, I just think the research part is important, but unfortunately, the amount of information that's coming out and the amount of people that are stepping up, this doesn't look good.
Right, not at all. And then also, we talked about this the last time Robie Zacarias came up, but why bring all this stuff up now? The man is dead. Why does all this stuff need to resurface? I think it's important that this be brought to light. Even though Robie Zacarias is dead, there needs to be justice, vindication for the victims of this. I believe that is how, that is part of the path of justice, is that will be revealed. So yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, and also to hold, it's possible that Robie Zacarias' ministry is complicit in the crime.
Sure.
So again, I don't want to just go out there and just accuse everybody, but there needs to be justice.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Alrighty, so on to the main topic today. We're going to be talking about God and sin and salvation in the Old Testament. We have some great questions. By the way, if you have a question you want us to answer on the podcast, you can message us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can email us at theologythursdaypodcast@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. Part of what makes this podcast what it is, especially this season, we're leaning back into this model of doing things, is questions from the listeners. We are not experts. We're students just like you, but we want to take this journey together. So please send us your questions. We have some great questions this week. The first question comes from Josh Oxendine. The question is, what is the origin of sin? Or rather, he just put the origin of sin as a topic for us to discuss, but I posed it as a question. So regardless, there's the topic, the origin of sin. Where did all this sin stuff start?
Right, so I was, in looking at this question beforehand, I was kind of confused about really how to tackle this, because origin of sin, what is that question asking? It seems very broad. Are we asking, who created sin? Are we asking who committed the first sin? So the way I actually tackled this was was kind of asking the first question is, who created sin? Or where did sin come from? And the answer to that is, well, nobody created sin. We have to think about what sin is. What is the very definition of sin? And we're going to look back. I'm going to throw in the Westminster Confession of Faith and Catechism to help answer this. If you don't know what the Westminster Confession and Catechism is, it's a 17th century document that outlines it's basically a large statement of faith for a few particular denominations that hail from the Reformed tradition. It was written in the 17th century by what we call the Westminster Divines, a group of pastors and theologians in England who were Reformed. They wrote this. And so anyways, they came up with questions and answers to help people understand their faith. So one of the questions they ask is, what is sin? And their answer is that sin is any want of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. And when we hear that, we kind of have to flesh that out a little bit more, because this is written in early modern English, and so some of those phrases sound a little outdated. So what did these people mean when they said any want of conformity unto? Now, word want here doesn't mean that we desire conformity to the law of God, but rather we are lacking. That word, that connotation there is that we are deficient in something. So we are actually lacking conformity to the Word of God. So actually, sin is less than something. And really, when we go to the original meaning of the word sin, to sin means to miss the mark. Imagine being an archer shooting an arrow at a board, and what you're aiming for is the bullseye, the center of the board. Anything less than that is missing the mark. And so that's really where that idea comes from, that word sin, is to miss the mark. And the mark being perfection. So really, we think of sin not as an addition to something, but rather less than. So I find the question, who created sin? I find it kind of a silly question, although I don't mean that to be mean to anybody that you would ask a silly question. But really, I think of the question, who created sin, is similar to the question, who created non-existence? And the answer is, well, that's a dumb question. Non-existence is not a creation, right? A non-existence is the absence of creation. So that's the way I see this. God did not create sin. Sin did not come from God. So if we were asking the question, who committed the first sin, we look to the garden, we look to Adam and Eve who sinned. We also think about Satan, the devil. Although I think Johnny had a different little perspective on that, on Satan's sin.
He had a good distinction, because really, for a lot of people, what this question is, what is the origin of sin? Really what they're asking is, was it Satan or was it Adam? What came first, the chicken or the sin? And in this case, the thing is, sin is really, in the Bible, something that mankind, it's a curse on mankind, and it's something that plagues mankind. What Satan did, he's an otherworldly being, he's supernatural, a fallen angel. And what we're looking at there is there's a distinction between sin and evil. Essentially, because Satan is a supernatural being, he can't sin. That's only something that man can do. And Satan and his fall and all of that came from a place of pure spiritual evil.
And so another question we could ask is, or something we could talk about, is the origin of evil. And yet again, I go back to kind of my first point. God didn't create evil, right? Neither did God cause Satan to sin, or not to sin, but to be evil. We don't know when all that happened. We don't know when Satan made that transformation from an angel of the Lord to being rebellious towards God, and we don't know why he did it, but Satan did. But by no means would any of us say that God created sin, that God created evil. Nothing like that.
Right, and then you end up asking, well, then why did God give, the angels or the humans free will, the ability to do those things? And ultimately, it was the most loving thing that he could have done, is giving us free will. And it seems like, well, no, because if we didn't have that, if he just made it to where it was impossible for us to do certain things, which he has, I can't just get up and fly right now, but if he made it impossible for us to sin, then none of this would have happened. We wouldn't have all this sin and evil and death in the world. But he created us with free will so that our relationship with him could have intimacy to it. It could mean something. There's a pursuit there. It goes both ways.
So I actually have a different perspective on that, but we don't have to talk about that at this time.
Well, you shouldn't have said anything. You have to talk about it now.
Well, I'm just thinking, on the new heaven and in the new heaven and new earth, we will not have the ability to sin, or we will not. There will be no want of sin within us. We will not want to sin. That will be our very nature, is that we won't want to sin. So I don't think that means that we.
And we still have free will in the new heaven and new earth, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and we still
the
have
ability to make choices.
We still have the ability to make choices, but by our very nature, we will not sin. Also, how would I answer that question?
Why did God give people the ability to choose to sin?
Right. Why did God make people like that? My answer, I don't know. Ultimately, my answer would be because God saw that most fit in for his own divine purposes, for his glory. Everything that God does is for his glory, and both of us agree with that statement.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't know why God particularly decided that was the best way to display his glory, but he did. And we trust that, right? So.
Yeah. So the next question, we have two more questions. They're both from Cody Hausdorff. Shout out to Cody. Thank you for serving our country. Miss you. So here are the two questions. These are great questions. I love these questions. First question is, before Jesus died on the cross, how did people know that they were saved? And I remember asking that question a lot when I first read through the Old Testament. Because I'm like, what are they, how do you know you're saved? Because I'm told I know that I'm saved by putting my faith in Jesus Christ. They didn't. I mean, Jesus Christ hadn't come and died on the cross and 3 days later risen again. So how did they know they were saved?
Well, I will say the people in the Old Testament were saved the same exact way that people are saved today. And that's something we all agree with here, is that the Old Testament saints were saved by grace through faith. That the Old Testament saints were not saved by doing good works, or they weren't saved by following the law. Right? Neither were they saved by making sacrifices regularly. None of that saved them. Those things, the sacrifices and the law, were foreshadowing the Messiah to come, and that was what they put their faith in. They put their faith in the promises of God, and that God would one day rescue them.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, because in Genesis, God makes a covenant with Abraham, Abraham believes in it, and it says that God credited his faith as righteousness.
Yes, 15:6. And Abraham believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness.
And Paul refers to that later in Romans too, so we get reference to that in the New Testament. And it's really important to note that Abraham had faith not just in God in general, but in a specific promise from God. What are you looking at?
No, I'm just kind of
Okay, I'm sorry.
looking over our Maple Street empire here.
So he gave a specific. He put his faith in a specific promise from God. Look, lots of people believe in God. Satan and his demons believe in God, but Abraham believed in a specific promise from God. Ultimately, that covenant about blessing Abraham, blessing the nations through Abraham's lineage, ultimately is a promise about Jesus. And so we put our faith in a promise about Jesus, and so did Abraham. And I think the best way to look at it is we are looking backwards to the cross, an event in history, okay? And they were looking forward to the cross, an event in history. They didn't exactly know when or how it was going to happen, but they knew they had a promise that salvation would come through the Messiah, and that's it. So yeah, they were saved the same way. It's hard for us to process because we have more context, but they believed in the same promise. They just didn't have as many details revealed to them yet.
Yeah, that is a very important question to ask because a lot of people miss out on that question. They don't even think about that question, or maybe they just assume that that the Old Testament saints were saved by keeping the law. But that is a misunderstanding about the purpose of the law, and actually a misunderstanding about how salvation works.
Right. And we see that because there's so many people who kept the law very well that God, we see in the book of Isaiah, actually gets frustrated with because they're doing all the festivals and all the sacrifices and all the things, and it means nothing because their faith wasn't in the promise. Their heart wasn't surrendered to God. They were just going through the motions the same way we can get caught up in doing today. It was just religious obligation rather than real faith. And there's a difference between that. One saves and the other doesn't. So it's really important to make that distinction. Good stuff. Okay, the last one, sticking to the Old Testament, which, by the way, Andy Stanley was wrong. The Old Testament matters. Exodus refers to God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Does God still harden people's hearts today?
So this is a very scary question for people to tackle, because that line that we find, it's actually in multiple spots in the Exodus story about God hardening Pharaoh's hearts, and in fact, I'll just pull up at least one of the passages here.
Well, yeah, and so just some context for those who may not know. This is where Moses is coming to Pharaoh and asking him to let God's people, the Israelites, go. They're in slavery in Egypt, and so he keeps going, and Pharaoh keeps saying no, and God sends another plague. And each time, Pharaoh's heart is getting harder and harder against God and against Moses and the people of Israel, ultimately. And the first couple of times, it says that Pharaoh hardened Pharaoh's heart, essentially. It's kind of his own doing. And then the further we get into it, it says that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, which sounds like a pretty direct action.
Yeah.
Why don't you show us the actual scripture?
Exodus 10:27 says, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go." So that to many people, that has such a negative connotation there. It sounds so scary, and it sounds so unlike God that he would cause somebody to sin. And so that's where it falls apart, right? We look at passages like this from a different perspective. Ultimately, we understand the nature of man before Christ. Ephesians chapter 2 says that we are children of wrath, we're sons of disobedience. and we are dead in our trespasses. We actually have essentially a heart of stone as natural people. And other passages in the Bible make this clear as well. 1 Corinthians, I think it's 2:15, maybe 2:14, says, natural man cannot even understand the things of God. So natural man does not like God. The natural man actually hates God at a spiritual level. Yet we see in the world today, and we see in the world in the Bible, that wicked people have actually been blessed by God, and wicked people actually live comfortable lives. And furthermore, wicked people oftentimes are decent people.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and up till the plagues came up, Pharaoh lived a pretty comfortable life.
Absolutely, he was on top of the world basically, and so today we ask ourselves these questions. Why are even the wicked at least decent people? You give the charity. Save a cat from the pet the shelter. It's nice things. The reality is that while we are spiritually wicked and we hate God, God actually dispenses grace upon everybody. We know that as Christians, we are saved by grace through faith, and that is a special grace that God dispenses to us. But God actually dispenses a more general common grace upon the whole world, even the wicked. And this grace that God shares with everybody is actually a grace that not only allows the wicked to be blessed materially or whatnot, but also it keeps people from being as bad as they could be. We look at Hitler as somebody who was a terribly wicked person, but he could have been even worse. And furthermore, all of us could be even worse than we actually are. And so I think that's God's grace working in all of us in a certain way. And so the word that theologians use to describe that is common grace, that we receive a special grace from God for salvation, but the world as a whole receives a common grace that restrains our wickedness so that we're not all Hitlers. So anyways, how does this relate to this passage? By the way, I'm coming at this from a Reformed perspective, Calvinistic perspective, and so other people will answer this differently than me, and that's okay. So that's just a disclaimer, by the way. I feel Johnny,
disclaimed. Thank you.
Awesome. I know that Johnny probably has a different look at this,
and I can kind of rehash what Johnny said as best as I can.
So the way that we look at this, or at least I look at this from my Reformed perspective, is as Pharaoh hardens his own heart, God also removes some of that restraining power from Pharaoh's heart so that Pharaoh would fall even more into his wickedness. Ultimately, God has given Pharaoh what he wants. This is a pattern that we see in Scripture a lot. I'll point you to Romans chapter 1, this idea that God actually gives people over to their sin. God actually gives people what they want, and what people want is to do what they want in their own eyes. As Romans 1 chapter talks about this, how natural men wanted to do what they wanted to do, and God gave them over to that. And that is actually a form of divine judgment. Oftentimes, what we want is not actually what's good for us. And so many times, if God gives you what you want, that might not be a good thing for you. That might actually lead further to your descent. And that could be a form of judgment in your life by God. And so I think that's what we see here, is that God is removing some of his restraining power, some of his grace from Pharaoh's life in order that Pharaoh would fall even more. And in doing this, God accomplishes his divine purposes, and that is to save the Hebrews from slavery, to redeem them from slavery, to rescue them out of the hands of Egypt. So all of this is according to God's purposes. So yeah, that's the way we look at this passage. God did not make or force Pharaoh to sin, but rather God took his hand away from Pharaoh. And doing that, Pharaoh did what he wanted to do all along.
Right. And so here's a side note. This is not the actual topic, but I was just thinking about this while you were talking about common grace and special grace, like a specific grace for believers, there's the irony right there of the kind of prosperity gospel mentality is people get saved expecting and wanting even more common grace and completely ignoring the specific grace they've been given, salvation and sanctification, which really should be our focus. Mm-hmm. And they want more common grace. They want more of worldly blessings,
right.
The things that, sure, it's fine. Every good perfect gift is from above. It's okay to enjoy a biscuit at Maple Street or your vehicle. That's not a sin in and of itself. But people, decide they want to be Christians because they want more of that. And it's that's not really the kind of grace that we should be excited about. In the grand scheme of things, that stuff doesn't matter. It's just kind of a nice bonus. So that's a separate. That's a whole nother talk right there. But I'm gonna try and rehash with Johnny, and he can grade us next week and see if I did okay, because I'm trying to represent what he shared, because he had some good stuff on this. But like I said, that sounds very direct of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, like he's just going in there and just making that
It sounds mean.
Yeah,
like
it does.
Do that.
It does. And Johnny's perspective of it that I thought was pretty interesting, I never thought about it this way before, is that each time that Pharaoh has a chance to do the right thing, Moses comes before him, says, "Let my people go." Essentially, every time that the idea of doing the right thing of God comes before him, it is further provoking him into a hardened heart. Because he was already, if you're an Arminian, he was already predetermined to not believe in God. If you're a Calvinist, you could say he was already predestined to not believe in God. Either one works. But his mind was already made up, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more he's presented with this, the more bitter he gets. And the example that Johnny used was, say you're a part of a political party called the Panda Party. I'm going to put the Connor twist on it because I think Kanye West's political campaign is hilarious. The birthday party, okay? You're part of the birthday party, and you're predetermined that you are never. Okay, you're the birthday party. I'm the Panda Party. Okay. All right? You're predetermined that you are never going to be a part of the Panda Party. Your mind is made up.
Right. Yeah. The birthday party is superior.
And I sit down and talk to you not to understand your party more or to just help you understand mine more. I am sitting down to change your mind, and I just keep hammering you with it, and you keep explaining. No,
yeah, I'm never gonna recant.
After a while, you might start to get heated. Like, no, that's not. Your heart starts to harden towards it because I'm provoking you.
I'm harboring bitter feelings towards you about this.
So that was kind of his perspective. That's what's happening there. Is it's actually God's giving him a chance, but because of where his heart is already at, it's sending him further into it, deeper into this opposition towards God, which is an interesting way to look at it. To be honest, I don't think that perspective and what you said can't both be happening at the same time.
Right. I think me and Johnny both definitely agree that God is giving Pharaoh what he wants.
Right.
Ultimately.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, there's but here's the big question there. Does God still harden people's hearts today? And yes.
Yes. The answer is yes. God still can do that.
And there's multiple references to this in the New Testament. Paul talks about the Gentiles in Ephesians, I think it's chapter 4, being hardened in their sinful ways. Jesus multiple times refers to the people's hearts being hardened. when he's performing miracles and they're just not having it, he says their hearts are hardened. He moves on.
And also in sharing parables with his disciples, Jesus uses parables as a way to what's the word I'm looking for? To conceal truth from the mass whose hearts are hardened. And this is a form of divine judgment upon them because they don't want to understand Jesus. They don't want to put their faith in Jesus.
And Jesus refers to passages from the Old Testament. Take that, Andy Stanley, where it talks about hearts being hardened. So, yes, it still happens today, and it is a scary thing. It is a kind of, but when we, it's people always get caught up on, well, God can't do that. That's mean. That's not fair. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, if you want fair, we'd all be burning in hell right now. We don't deserve anything. We are not owed anything. So you want to talk about what's fair. That's what's fair. But God has lavished his grace upon us by offering any of us
That's why it's
the
called.
gift of
That's why it's
salvation.
called grace,
Yeah.
right? Because it's something we don't deserve. God has given to us. If we demanded that God owed us grace, then it ceases to be grace. So that's why we call it grace. It's a gift from God.
Right, and that's why we talk about mercy, which mercy's great. I mean, that's not getting what you do deserve.
Right.
God went a step further with grace, is giving us what we did not deserve. And he offers both to us, and that's a pretty amazing thing when you think about it.
Yes.
So, thank you again for your great questions. Please keep sending them to us. We are excited about this season. Thank you for being patient with us as we try and work out some of these technical problems. We're going to have it up and running soon, and hopefully we'll have Johnny next week, because it just doesn't feel the same without him.
Yeah. It's like we're missing a third of the podcast.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. We will be back next Thursday. Go ahead and say it, Ryan.
Ja, yeet.